So this talk is going to be about another way of looking at the developments of the last few years, what some would call Web 2.0 or social media. But none of these descriptions get at the fundamental economic reality of this shift that's occurring, which is really a shift from linear value creation to superlinear or even exponential value creation. So the presentation wouldn't be nearly as interesting if I didn't lead with a very provocative statement. So the subtitle of the presentation is Why Companies like Facebook, Twitter, eBay, and Apple, but not Google, will determine the future of the world. Maybe just the internet, not necessarily the whole world. So to be clear, what I'm trying to say here is not that Google's going to experience a reversal in fortunes. Its market cap and share of the online advertising market will remain intact. They may even grow. But the argument I'm going to make is that Google's relative importance as a dominant player on the internet will likely decline over the next decade as the importance of this new kind of company takes root. So we've entered an age where the deployment of new and unique communication networks, which once took decades to create, because of the time it took to lay cables and buy hardware, can now happen in a matter of years. And companies that control these networks benefit from the most powerful of all business externalities, which we call network effects. This means two key things. Companies that understand how to build and manipulate networks will dominate the next phase of the internet, and collecting data is less important than connecting people. So what are network effects? Shapiro and Varian have a great little shorthand definition. They say that when the value of a product to one user depends upon how many other users of the product there are. The clearest example of this is seen in communication networks like the telephone system, but there are virtual networks which exhibit powerful network effects as well, like the network of users running Windows, the network of people using iPod or iTunes, the network of developers building software for the iPhone. Network effects produce superlinear and in some cases exponential increases in value proportionate to the number of users. So the power of networks. Network effects need to be understood in terms of three kinds of value. The option value, which is the overall expected value of the network in terms of the number of potential connections, the active network value, and the switching costs, which increase exponentially, the cost of switching for any single user or group of users on the network. More about the power of networks. Networks exhibit a few powerful tendencies. Network value and switching costs lead to powerful market lock-in, and network effects lead to winner-take-all markets. You see this with things like the auction market, where eBay has completely taken over. Metcalfe's law provides the best rule of thumb that we have for evaluating the potential value of networks. It states that for a communications network, where value is measured by pairwise connections between nodes, the value of a network is roughly proportionate to the square of the number of participants. In truth, it probably overstates the case somewhat, as the observed values of networks don't quite behave this way. So the question is, what is a network company? And this is a company whose primary business value rests upon cultivating an active network of customers. The basic unit of value for a network company is not measured by the amount of data it stores, but by the number of connections it facilitates. Examples of marketplaces like eBay and Craigslist, communication networks like Facebook, Twitter, Skype, LinkedIn, games like World of Warcraft, Zynga, Foursquare, platforms like the Apple iPhone platform or the Facebook platform. The first phase of the internet was characterized by information services where the value is expressed linearly. Examples are Google, Yahoo, CNET, YouTube, MSN. The second phase has been dominated by network services. Examples, Facebook, Twitter, eBay, PayPal. An interesting feature of network businesses is that the best products don't always win. One feature of networks, I'm going to give some examples of this, but this part of the presentation is going to be more a matter of my own personal subjective opinion than a matter of fact. First sort of example that pops to mind is Craigslist, which doesn't appear to have changed much since 1995. Another example would be MySpace, which was a bit of an abomination of a product, and yet for quite a long time seemed to dominate on the internet. Another example would be AIM, which was probably the worst designed instant messaging client, and yet network effects had it locked in as the number one player in the US for almost a decade. However, the best example of this is eBay, and this is an example that plays a special role in this talk. So eBay is a classic example of the power of network effects. OnSale was a viable competitor to eBay until 1998, when eBay achieved an early lead. And then between Q3 and Q4 of 1998, eBay doubled while OnSale.com grew by only 25%. By 1999, on sale had been virtually annihilated. This also demonstrates how a company, eBay, can become a victim of its own success. eBay's network effects drove the early growth and locked competition out of eBay's core markets. Having no competitors generally doesn't breed a culture of excellence. And eBay executives understood this, and they were actually known to quip, and this is a quote from a handful of different eBay executives, "A monkey could run this business." So the company was known for its poor product execution and technical problems, and the site was brought to its knees 5 times in 1999, disrupting commerce and sending eBay's stock price crashing. But even more incredibly, while eBay recognized the need for a payment system to support its enormous transaction volume, it purchased BillPoint in 1999, all this before the launch of PayPal. In spite of this, in spite of its monopoly control of the auction market, which it should have been able to successfully leverage into adjacent payments markets, eBay was unable to compete with PayPal's product. PayPal was able to leverage clever financial incentives and inherent virality to quickly establish a foothold within the eBay community. And this gave PayPal the scale necessary to invoke the threat of antitrust litigation against the eBay monopoly. Blocking PayPal at this point would have been perceived as anti-competitive behavior. This brings up the question of why did eBay buy Skype? And I actually think buying Skype turned out to be a much better decision than anyone anticipated. In 2005, eBay paid $2.6 billion for Skype. And at the time, many Silicon Valley executives, myself included, believed the Skype purchase was a terrible move. eBay seemed to be dramatically overpaying for a product with sluggish core business. The world surely thought that eBay would lose the bulk of its investment. I probably needed a taste of my own medicine because it was clear in 2005 that the market had tipped towards Skype. And now 4 years later, the results are in. Skype has grown at a staggering rate. It now has 521 million registered users, and it's running at a $740 million yearly run rate, which was announced yesterday. So many users have become dependent on the Skype out service that monetization has exploded, and this is a characteristic we often see with networks. Monetization lags the economic user growth. Monetization lags user growth. So eventually, non-competitive pricing kicks in, and monetization skyrockets even more. So Meg Whitman may have been vindicated in her strategic decision, and someone's probably going to get a sweet deal by buying Skype. So I want to turn my attention to social networks for a minute. Social networks are communication services, and they obey the laws of networks. It's important to note that Friendster was not a fad. The company actually failed due to difficulty scaling the infrastructure, not because of poor product execution. So you can see here that around 2004, there's a reversal that occurs, and MySpace actually takes over the market from Friendster. So MySpace at this point is the dominant social network in the US. If we go to the next slide, you can see that it takes until about 2008 for Facebook to overtake MySpace globally. The interesting question here from a network perspective is how the hell did MySpace let this happen? MySpace had such an enormous network advantage, close to 100 million users when Facebook had only 8 million. So Facebook probably should not have won based on the laws of networks. But there was systematic product failure on the part of MySpace. And Facebook also did something pretty smart. We established a beachhead in the college market, which was a secure place where we could scale the network in order to achieve the scale that we needed to launch a broader attack on MySpace. The question then is, how did we win the campus network? So the interesting thing about the college was it was the only demographic of people who were not currently using MySpace. They didn't have MySpace accounts for whatever reason. So we were able to move into a number of schools fairly quickly. There were a lot of enemy schools with their own social networks that had been set up. And because we'd captured a lot of elite schools whose social networks were densely connected with the remaining holdout elite schools, those eventually fell to Facebook. We then waged war against the remaining holdout schools by launching Facebook networks at geographically neighboring schools, and in a matter of months, the holdouts crumbled under the weight of their friend connections with students in neighboring schools. The battle for the campus is now being recapitulated in the ongoing battle for control of the world. The latest front in the battle is Germany. Facebook is currently dominant in most Western European countries, which are economically and socially similar to Germany. So as you can see from this chart, the German forces probably will not be able to withstand the overwhelming advance of Facebook into their territory. So this actually leads to an interesting question, which is that I think data portability is probably a red herring. The value of connections grows superlinearly, whereas the value of a large data set grows linearly at best. Moving data can be hard, but moving people is even harder. The switching costs for any single user on a social network are exponential. This is because if everybody has 300 friends, let's say, 100 of which they actually interact with, for any user to get the same value out of a rival network, they have to convince 100 of their friends to switch. And for those people to get the same value, they have to convince 100 of their friends to switch, and so on. So even if some overlap between networks is assumed, the switching cost for any single user on the network is close to exponential. Another example is eBay's database of auctions. It has some value, but it would be worthless without the live network of buyers and sellers, and eBay makes its money by facilitating the transactions between buyers and sellers. So this brings me back to my point about Google. Google doesn't own networks. Their core business does not exhibit network effects. Google has more users than anyone performing searches, but this in itself does not give them an advantage. Google's actually benefiting here from an information asymmetry, not a network effect. It knows more about what people search for and what people click on, and it can use that information to provide better search results and target advertisements better. The AdWords marketplace is also not a network marketplace because it doesn't facilitate relationships between many buyers and many sellers. Google is the seller, and there are many buyers. This more closely resembles a broadcast network, which is represented by a linear value graph where the value of the broadcast network is proportionate to the number of viewers. Google only owns a handful of true network services, only one of which, AdSense, has achieved a significant level of market dominance. So in closing, Google will remain an economic powerhouse, but its relative importance on the internet will decline. The majority of new economic value on the internet will not be generated by search, and over the next decade, the aggregate value of this emerging class of companies will come to dominate the internet.